So they start with the preconceived idea that evolution happened, and they did nothing but follow Aristotle's old chain of being, that you start with the simple and go to the complex. Evolution is nothing more than a regurgitation of Aristotle's theory from 2,004 or 500 years ago, whatever it was. The sorting of the fossils in the fossil record, first place, there is no clear sorting to the fossils. And even major evolutionists will tell you, look folks, it's silly for the creationists to be arguing about the order of the fossil record because there is no good order to the fossil record. The fact is, I think clams are generally found at the bottom of the geologic column, though not always. I mean, clams are found on top of Mount Everest. But clams are generally found at the bottom because they're already at the bottom. I mean, when a flood comes, they're the first ones going to be buried, obviously. So I think they're buried, birds are buried on top because birds are going to be the last ones to drown in a flood. They fly around till they run out of gas. So they're sorted based upon their habitat. Secondly, they're sorted based upon their intelligence. As best anybody can figure out, clams are not too bright. Thirdly, they're sorted based upon their mobility. Clams cannot run very fast. So they're likely to be the first ones buried. And I think if there is any sorting to the geologic column, and there isn't a real good sorting, but any sorting that there is based on hydrologic sorting that is obviously from a flood. See, some people don't like the idea of a flood because that means God, who created the world, has the authority to judge his creation. And they want to keep their God, if they have one, they want to keep him in a box where he has no authority to judge their sin. I'm convinced that's the real hidden agenda behind all this. The Bible says in 2 Peter chapter 3, in the last days, scoffers would come that would be willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood. And that's what we've got.
Well, first of all, if there's no order, then there can be no sorting, so that the clams wouldn't be at the bottom because they were stupid and the birds at the top because they were smart enough to fly away from it. They would be all mixed up. You wouldn't find the dumb animals at the bottom and the smart animals at the top. You simply would find everything all mixed up. The rest of the question, which I don't think Mr. Hovind got to, it's difficult to read, admittedly. If you use your infinite bird and bones and clams arguments, please keep in mind that there are far more than birds and clams, and explain why the lighter, less dense creatures are near the bottom. Well, you know, if the dinosaurs got caught in the flood, and you know, maybe Noah did take two of each kind of dinosaur, two dinosaur kind, but the rest of them certainly got wiped out in the flood. They're heavy. Shouldn't they sink to the bottom? Heavy things sink to the bottom when they drown. Bodies sink to the bottom until they start to decompose and they bloat and they float back up. So why wouldn't you find everything that just sort of settled to the bottom? These things sort of settle out and they get all mixed up when they settle out. Interesting note, the single catastrophic event. You know, we brought up the fact earlier that in the Bible it claims that the earth is flat. You're also talking about a culture, when the Bible was written, or at least parts of it were written, who lived in fertile river valleys. And to them, catastrophic events were floods. So it was natural for them to write about floods. It's interesting that you don't find cultures that live in the desert necessarily writing about floods in their creation stories. They write about other kinds of creation. The Australian Aborigines, for example, who live in a desert, they talk about how the ancestors sang the world into creation. It's a really beautiful story. If you're not familiar with it, you should read it. Because I don't just read, you know, the biblical creation stories. I read lots of different creation stories. I don't necessarily agree with all of them. You know, you can't agree with every one of them, but, you know, I don't tell somebody else that they can't agree with them either. The stratigraphic column does exist. We use things like biological correlation. You can go to one stratigraphic layer in one part of the country or the world and find an organism trapped in a particular layer. And you go to another part and you can find another fossil, the same kind of animal, oh, I have to stop now, in the same stratigraphic profile. Take a geology class. Monkeys, where do women evolve from? Well, that's a good question. Let me bring up Lucy and her kind, her kith and kin. We talk about we don't have any bones from Lucy's foot, but Lucy's not the only Australopithecus afarensis, to use the genus and species, that we found. In fact, we have, you know, a number of them, including a group of 13 individuals that we found, and we do have foot bones from them. And this is just a comparison of a chimpanzee foot, an Australopithecine foot, not necessarily Lucy's foot, okay, but one of her species, and a human foot. And to talk about the fact that the footprints are fake because they're modern human footprints, this is an outline of one of the footprints at Laetoli, and it is clearly not a modern human footprint. It is what we would consider a transitional footprint. If an ape footprint, apes have opposable big toes, not unlike our thumbs. They're not exactly the same. Apes have slightly longer fingers and slightly shorter thumbs, but they're opposable. And believe me, you go to the zoo and you can watch, chimpanzees can climb the heck out of trees. They got 4 hands, essentially, right? So they have an opposable big toe. Humans don't. We're bipedal creatures. We walk upright. We have a big toe that's in line with the rest of our toes. The soldiers all line up in perfect order. In fact, I'll tell you all to do an experiment tonight. When you get up and walk around, feel the weight of your body and how it's distributed on your feet. One of the reasons why that big toe is where it is because it's a major balance point. If you lose your little toe in an accident, get it cut off, you don't have to necessarily learn how to walk all over again. It might be difficult, while it's sore, but if you lose your big toe, and my nephew had a lawnmower accident, he lost his big toe to a lawnmower. It took him several months of recuperation and therapy to learn how to walk again because he lost a major balance point. That's what we use it for. Okay? The footprint of the Australopithecines that lived about 3 million years ago, which is about halfway in between when we think humans first emerged and today, has a foot that is transitional. Here are the bones, and here's an outline of the footprint. This is an outline of the Laetoli footprint with the bones superimposed so you can see how it fits together. The big toe is off at an angle. It's not opposable like you would expect to see an ape footprint. It's not straight in a line like you would expect to see a modern human footprint. Okay? It is what we call a divergent big toe. It's off at a slight angle. Now, if I'm going to tell you that in evolutionary terms, we transitioned, we went from a quadruped, an ape-like creature that had opposable big toes, to a bipedal human-like creature that doesn't have an opposable big toe, the transition has to be somewhere in the middle. It can't be fully opposable and it can't be in a straight line. It's somewhere in between, and that's, by golly, what we see here, somewhere in between. And I'll stop there. Would you like me to leave this up, or?
Yes, if you don't mind, that would be great. There are 2 books we have on our table over here that deal with this subject. One is called Bones of Contention, which goes through the information about the Lucy, the Australopithecines. The one that was labeled Lucy in National Geographic 1985 was not Lucy's knee, at least, was not Lucy's knee at all. Donald Johanson let that one slide by. I've got, I think, all of Donald's books at home. Lucy, if the toe is slightly separated, again, I point out, folks, you're finding a bone in the dirt. You don't know that it had any kids. And as far as the way they date those layers, it's really hilarious when you get into it to see how these layers are dated. If we had time, I didn't quite get time to call it up because we're jumping back and forth so many subjects here, but the layers of ash are dated by typically potassium-argon dating. We cover that for probably 30 minutes on videotape number 7 and also on my website, drdino.com, with some of the wild dates that are obtained by potassium-argon dating. A layer of ash called the KBS tuft had been dated for years at being 212 million years old. They dated it several different ways. Everybody agreed that's 212 million years old, until Richard Leakey found a perfectly normal human skull under the KBS tuft. Now they have to go back and redate the KBS tuft because they know their date wasn't right. Well, the only reason you know it wasn't right is because it didn't match your preconceived idea of evolution. I don't have time. We've got less than a minute. I can't even get my slides up for this, but a person that goes barefoot all of their life has a foot that's a different shape and wider. The width-to-length ratio is different than a person that wears shoes all their life. The opposable toe that they put on the